There are moments when love becomes responsibility, and for Mary Austin, it began the night Freddie Mercury calmly explained how he wanted his funeral to be. She found him propped against pillows that seemed too large for his diminished frame, afternoon light filtering through curtains he'd insisted remain open, because he said darkness made him feel like he was already gone. And in his hands, thinner than she'd ever seen them, the rings he'd worn for decades now loose enough to spin, he held a cream-colored envelope with her name written in handwriting that wavered but was unmistakably his. "Mary," he said, and his voice carried that particular weight she'd learned to recognize over 20 years of loving him in all the ways a person can love another. "I need you to do something for me, something nobody else can do. Will you sit?" She sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle him because even slight movements brought pain now, and he handed her the envelope with both hands as if it were something precious and dangerous simultaneously. "These are my funeral instructions. Every detail. How I want it done, who I want there, what I absolutely don't want. You're the only person I trust to make sure it happens exactly as I've written. Not Brian, not Roger, not Jim. You. Because you're the only one who's never tried to make me into something I'm not." His eyes, still sharp despite the morphine, held hers with an intensity that made her understand this wasn't just about funeral arrangements. This was about control, about dignity, about a man who'd spent his entire career commanding stages and audiences, making sure his final exit was conducted on his terms, not the world's. What followed both in that bedroom conversation and in the careful execution of those instructions after his death would become one of rock music's most closely guarded secrets. A mystery that persists decades later, and a testament to the kind of love that honors someone's wishes even when the entire world demands answers. This is the story of the funeral Freddie Mercury planned when he could barely hold a pen, and the secret Mary Austin has kept for over 30 years, because keeping it is the last gift she can give him. Mary's hands trembled as she held the envelope, not yet opening it, because once she did, this became real, became acknowledgement that they were planning his goodbye, and Freddie noticed the tremor and managed a weak version of that smile that had charmed millions. "Don't be afraid of it, darling. It's just paper, just instructions. It can't hurt you." But they both knew that was a lie, that everything in that envelope would hurt because it represented finality, represented Freddie accepting what his body had been telling him for weeks that time was running out, and decisions needed to be made while he still had strength to make them. She opened it carefully, extracting several pages covered in his handwriting, shakier than usual but still distinctively his. The letters formed with the same attention to aesthetics he'd brought to everything, even in this. "Read it now," he instructed, "while I'm here to explain if anything's unclear." The first page detailed the funeral service itself, and the very first instruction made Mary's breath catch. "Private service, maximum 35 people, invitation only, no press, no photographers, no publicity. If anyone brings a camera, they will be removed immediately." 35 people, out of the millions who'd loved him, who'd bought his records, who'd filled his stadiums, only 35 would be allowed to say goodbye in person. She looked up, questioning, and Freddie's expression was firm despite his exhaustion. "I've spent my entire adult life being photographed, analyzed, watched. I'm not spending my funeral that way. Those 35 people are the ones who love Fred, not Freddie Mercury. That's the difference that matters." The list of those 35 was attached, written in order of importance, and Mary saw her own name at the top, followed by Jim Hutton, then the remaining members of Queen, then family members, close friends, people who'd been there through the years. She noticed her sister's name, Freddie's parents, his sister Kashmira, the hairdresser who'd cut his hair for 15 years, the cook who'd prepared meals when he was too weak to eat, but she made dishes that tempted him anyway. 35 people who'd touched his life in real ways, not public ways. "No speeches," the next instruction read. "No eulogies, no performances. Keep it simple. Zoroastrian prayers. Music if you want, but nothing of mine. Let them remember the performances from when I was alive, not trying to recreate them over my coffin." Mary's eyes blurred reading this because she knew what it meant. Freddie didn't want his funeral to become a show, didn't want people performing grief, didn't want the theatrical send-off the world would expect. He wanted simple, private, real. The next section dealt with what he didn't want, and the language became more forceful. No lying in state, no public viewing, no memorial service at Albert Hall or Wembley or anywhere people expect. If they try to organize something public, stop them. This is not negotiable. I will not be displayed like an artifact. The last photos of me are the ones I chose to release. Nobody gets to photograph me in a coffin. Nobody. She understood this completely because she'd seen what the press had done these last months. The telephoto lenses trying to catch glimpses through Garden Lodge's windows. The paparazzi camping outside hoping for photos of him dying. The tabloid offers of enormous money to anyone who could get images of Freddie Mercury's final days. He was denying them that final invasion, claiming his death as his own private moment. The service location, she read aloud. West London Crematorium, not Westminster Abbey, not St. Paul's, somewhere normal, somewhere that doesn't make this into a state occasion. Book it under a different name so press doesn't find out until it's over. Freddie shifted against his pillows, wincing with pain before continuing. I don't want my funeral to become a circus, Mary. I don't want helicopters overhead and photographers on rooftops and live television coverage. I want the people who actually knew me to say goodbye in peace. Is that really too much to ask? His voice cracked on the last words, and she saw tears forming in his eyes. And she realized this wasn't just about privacy. This was about dignity, about a man who'd lost control of so much of his body wanting to maintain control over his final moments. It's not too much, she whispered. I'll make sure it happens exactly as you want. Then she reached the final page, and her breath stopped completely because this was the instruction that would matter most, that would outlast everything else, that would become the secret she'd carry for the rest of her life. My ashes, it read. This is the most important instruction. You will scatter them somewhere meaningful, somewhere I loved, but you will never, ever tell anyone where. Not Brian, not Roger, not Jim, not my family, not the press, nobody. Take the secret to your own grave. The writing became more forceful, underlined multiple times. They will turn my grave into a tourist attraction. Fans will leave flowers and notes and make pilgrimages. I've seen what happens at Elvis's grave, at Jim Morrison's. They turn death into performance. They make grief into spectacle. I won't have it. Let them remember the music. Let them remember the performances. But let my body rest in private, unknown, undisturbed. Promise me, Mary, this is the only thing I'm asking that really matters. Everything else is just details. This is essential. Mary was crying now, really crying, because she understood what he was asking, to carry this burden alone, to withstand pressure from everyone who'd want to know, to keep this one thing sacred when the world would demand access to every part of him. Freddie, she managed through tears, people will want to say goodbye. Fans who loved you, people whose lives you changed. They'll want a place to go, to feel close to you. He reached out with effort and took her hand, his grip weak but insistent. They have the music, darling. They have 40 years of recordings, of performances, of me giving them everything I had. They don't need my bones. They don't need to know where my ashes are scattered. Love doesn't require a location. It doesn't need coordinates. If they loved me, they'll feel me in the songs. That's enough. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that people needed closure, needed physical places to mourn. But looking at his face, so thin now, so tired, but still so certain, she understood this was about control, about autonomy, about claiming back privacy from a world that had consumed every other part of him. What about your family? She asked carefully. Your mother. Don't they deserve to know? His expression softened but didn't change. My mother will understand. She knows I spent my whole life trying to find peace. She'll want me to have it in death, even if she doesn't have the comfort of a grave to visit. Tell her I'm finally resting. That's enough. The room fell quiet except for his breathing, labored but steady, and the distant sounds of London through the windows. Finally, Mary folded the papers carefully and looked at him with a question she had to ask. Where are you thinking? For the ashes? A small smile appeared beneath that famous mustache. I have a few ideas, places that meant something, but I haven't decided yet. I'll tell you when it's time, and then you'll do it, and you'll never speak of it. Can you promise me that? Can you carry this secret forever? She thought about what he was asking, decades of people asking, journalists investigating, fans pleading, friends wanting to know. She thought about keeping this from Brian and Roger, who'd been brothers to him, from Jim, who'd loved him, from Freddie's own parents. She thought about taking this secret to her own grave just as he was asking. I promise, she said, and meant it completely. Freddie's relief was visible, tension leaving his shoulders as he settled back into pillows. Good, thank you. That's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me, loving me enough to let me disappear. Over the next week, as Freddie's condition deteriorated, Mary carried that envelope everywhere, guarding it like sacred text. She showed it to no one, discussed it with no one, because he trusted her with this final act of self-determination, and she wouldn't betray that trust even to comfort others. 2 weeks later, on November 24th, 1991, Freddie Mercury died with Jim Hutton holding his hand and Mary nearby, and immediately the machinery of death began operating the necessary notifications, the legal requirements, the unstoppable information spread. Within hours, the world knew. Within days, the media siege began. Journalists camped outside Garden Lodge demanding details. Fans left flowers that piled into mountains. The world wanted a public mourning, a state funeral, something befitting rock royalty. Mary opened the envelope and began executing Freddie's instructions with military precision. She contacted exactly 35 people, swearing each to secrecy about the service details. She booked West London Crematorium under a false name. She arranged for Zoroastrian prayers. She vetted every single person who'd attend, making sure no one would bring cameras, no one would leak details to press. The funeral happened on November 27th, 1991, 3 days after Freddie's death. Exactly 35 people gathered at West London Crematorium while thousands of fans held vigil outside Garden Lodge, unaware the service was happening miles away. No press, no photographers, no public spectacle. Just 35 people who'd loved him saying goodbye in private. Brian May would later describe it as the most emotionally devastating day of his life. Standing in that small crematorium chapel with so few people, looking at the casket and understanding that this was really goodbye, that Freddie was really gone. Roger Taylor wept openly, no longer the tough drummer, but a man who'd lost a brother. John Deacon stood silent, looking like he wanted to disappear. Jim Hutton could barely stand, supported by friends. Freddie's parents looked smaller somehow, aged decades and days. And through it all, Mary Austin stood strong because she had one final task to complete, one secret to keep, one promise to honor. The service was simple, as requested. Zoroastrian prayers were sung. No one made speeches, though several people whispered private goodbyes to the casket. No one sang Queen songs, respecting Freddie's wish to be remembered as he'd been in life, not imitated in death. When it was over, when Freddie's body had been taken for cremation, the 35 people left quietly, scattering to grieve privately, and the press never knew it had happened until it was too late to crash it. The ashes were delivered to Mary in a simple urn. She held them in her Garden Lodge apartment and waited, because Freddie had said he'd tell her where when the time came, and she believed somehow she'd know. Days turned to weeks. The media pressure intensified. Everyone wanted to know where Freddie would be buried, where his final resting place would be. Brian called asking gently if there were plans. Roger wanted to organize a memorial. Freddie's parents requested information. Jim, devastated and grieving, asked if he could visit wherever Freddie was laid to rest, and Mary said nothing to any of them. I promised, was all she'd say. I promised him. Months passed, then years. The mystery deepened. Investigators tried to track down information. Journalists followed Mary, hoping she'd lead them to the location. Fans developed elaborate theories. Some claimed he was scattered at Garden Lodge. Others said Lake Geneva near his final recording sessions. Zanzibar, where he was born. India, where he grew up. Wembley Stadium. The list went on. Mary never confirmed or denied anything. At some point when Freddie had told her from beyond, through the clarity of his instructions, or perhaps through her own deep understanding of what he'd have wanted, Mary took those ashes to a place that meant something. She scattered them alone, telling no one, marking nothing, leaving no trace. And then she returned to normal life, carrying a secret that would define the rest of her existence. Over 30 years have passed since Freddie Mercury's death. Mary Austin is now in her 70s, and she has never revealed where his ashes are scattered. Not to friends, not to family, not to biographers who've offered money, not to fans who've begged. She keeps the secret as her final gift to the man she loved, honoring his wish to rest unknown, undisturbed, unphotographed. In interviews, she sometimes addresses it with the same simple statement. Freddie didn't want to be a tourist attraction. He wanted peace. I gave him my word, and I'm keeping it. That's what love is, respecting someone's wishes, even when it's difficult. People have called her selfish for keeping it secret, have accused her of denying fans closure, have suggested she's protecting the location because she wants to be the only one who knows where he is. But those who knew Freddie understand. This wasn't about Mary controlling access. This was about Freddie controlling his own final rest, choosing privacy after a lifetime of public consumption. Brian May has said in interviews that while he'd love to know where Freddie rests, he respects Mary's silence. Freddie chose Mary to execute his wishes because he knew she'd honor them no matter what. That's real love. That's real friendship. Roger Taylor admitted it was hard not knowing, but acknowledged Freddie's right to privacy. He gave us everything in life, the music, the performances, the friendship. If he wanted peace in death, we owe him that. Jim Hutton, before his own death in 2010, said he understood completely. Freddie and I talked about it. He didn't want to be on display forever. I miss him every day, but I don't need coordinates to feel close to him. He's in my heart. That's enough. And Mary carries on, now the keeper of rock music's greatest secret. The woman who loved Freddie Mercury enough to give him the one thing money and fame couldn't buy: true privacy, true rest, true peace. The envelope sits in her possession still. Those handwritten instructions in Freddie's wavering script, proof that even in death, he orchestrated his final performance perfectly. No spectacle, no circus, no public display, just a quiet scattering in a place known only to Mary, and silence that honors his memory more than any monument ever could. Somewhere in a location only Mary knows, Freddie Mercury rests, not as a rock star, not as a legend, not as Freddie Mercury of Queen, just as Fred, just as a person who finally found the peace that eluded him in life. And that's exactly how he wanted it.